In today's episode, we talk about how India is building health security infrastructure for the next viral outbreak. We also take a look at Jharkhand, where a dispute over unpaid work turned into caste-based abuse and violence. But we begin today by talking about the deliberations the government has been holding around the national song Vande Mataram. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. During the parade on the 77th Republic Day on Monday, around 2,500 artists from across the country, dressed in traditional costumes representing different states, came together to perform Vande Mataram, which was also this year's theme for the event. Now, as you may already know, the government has been trying to promote and celebrate the song as part of a year-long campaign. But taking things a step further, the Indian Express has learned that earlier this month, a high-level government meeting was held to examine whether protocols similar to those followed for the national anthem could also be put in place for Vande Mataram. My colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Chief of the National Bureau, Ritika Chopra, who broke the story for the paper about what was discussed in that meeting.
Ritika, since we're going to be talking about this high-level meeting and the government deciding whether there should be certain protocols for Vande Mataram, could you talk about what are the protocols and the etiquettes prescribed for the recitation of the national anthem?
Right. So there is a constitutional obligation on, I think it's every citizen's fundamental duty to respect the national anthem. And this is with respect to its recitation. And for this purpose specifically, the government in the past, essentially the Ministry of Home Affairs, has issued very detailed executive orders. So when it comes to national anthem, there's of course an act, which is the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act of 1971. So that law is important here in this context. And the other is, like I mentioned, these are a bunch of executive orders issued by MHA and they're titled orders relating to the national anthem of India. If we quickly speak about the orders that have been issued by the MHA, it's interesting because these orders are pretty detailed and essentially list out how should one sing the national anthem. Detailed to the extent that, it gives you the full and short versions of the national anthem, original rather the longer version of the anthem last, which is 52 seconds. Then it also kind of lists out what is the playing time of the short version of the anthem. So these are very granular details on how the anthem is to be sung, played, on which occasions is it to be, compulsorily played, like the entire version. How should the mass singing of the anthem happen? And this is to essentially ensure that, the anthem is not disrespected in any way. To deal with any kind of disrespect brought upon the anthem, there is, of course, the law that I had mentioned. And that is obviously not limited to the anthem. This is essentially other symbols, which includes the flag, the constitution. But that law prescribes, mandates a punishment of up to 3 years, a fine, or both for acts like burning or, say, trampling the national flag. But also, of course, if there is someone who may have tried preventing, say, or rather disrupting the singing of the national anthem or any kind of disrespect, like I mentioned. So that also essentially would result in imprisonment of up to 3 years, a fine, or both.
And during the national anthem, we all stand in attention. So is that posture also specified in this law?
So the very detailed order that I'm talking about, in fact, even talks about that. And I would like to quickly read out from it, which is under a subtitle which says general. In those orders, it says whenever the anthem is sung or played, the audience shall stand to attention. However, when in the course of a newsreel or a documentary, when the anthem is played as part of the film, it is not expected of the audience to stand, as standing is bound to interrupt the exhibition of the film. So it actually goes into those kind of details that, when it's played, what is the posture that you should be standing, to attention. So those orders are very detailed on what is expected of those playing the anthem, what is expected of those singing the anthem, in the audience and on stage.
And so when we talk about this high-level meeting which recently took place, is the government now thinking that these protocols that are there for Jan Gan Man should now be there for Vande Mataram as well?
So Vande Mataram, as you know, is the national song. And unlike the national anthem, there is no fundamental duty placed on citizens to respect this song. Having said that, the Constituent Assembly did accord equal honor to the song. But just as how any disrespect to the anthem could land you in jail, there is no law or rule on how the song should be sung or what happens if someone were to disrespect the national song. Now, coming to our story that we did earlier this week was essentially that there is now a thinking within the government whether similar protocols, rules on the rendition, the recitation of the national song should also be introduced. And aside from that, should there also be penalties for any disrespect towards the national song? Now, this essentially was the subject of a meeting called by the MHA earlier this month, in which several ministry representatives were also in attendance. And as part of the discussions, from what we understand, that this was discussed, that whether there should be rules on how it should be recited, rendered, played at occasions, whether we need to go into the details of, there was even a discussion on whether should the song be sung compulsorily along with the national anthem, and if yes, should it precede the anthem or should it be sung after? So these were the discussions that took place during that meeting. We were told it sort of was a consultative process, but essentially that gave us an idea of what was the thinking within the government, and that pretty much fits into the government's effort to essentially raise the stature of the song.
Right, they've been trying to do this for some time. In fact, the cabinet recently approved the countrywide celebrations for the 150th anniversary of Vande Mataram.
Right. And through this, they want to essentially celebrate the spirit of the song and remind the country of its unique role, especially during the freedom struggle. So this essentially fits into that larger initiative that they've undertaken. And since it's a year-long celebration, it's kind of, if I'm not wrong, it's split into either 3 or 4 phases. The first one was last year in November. The second apparently has started or will begin this month. And then there are 2 more phases to it. So the deliberations are within that larger initiative.
Yeah, and for years now, we've seen that these 2 songs have been pitted against each other, the national anthem and the national song. And recently, we also had a very heated parliamentary debate about it. So could you talk about how the current government views Vande Mataram, especially when compared to the national anthem?
So in the last 4 to 5 years, especially, or in the last decade, this debate has been revived all over again. So initially, it was actually a bunch of cases filed in the court. Very recently, there have been several petitions which have been filed in courts which are seeking framework for, the singing of the song, the playing of the song, and they, petitions seeking clarity on whether any penalties can be prescribed, again, to prevent any insult to this song. So as recently in 2022, I think there was one in Supreme Court also, and that petition again made similar demands. And so it's by way of several petitions in court that debate has been revived. And it was by way of these petitions that the centre very recently has also been making the current position very clear that, look, there are currently no rules, rather protocols for the singing of the song. And the courts have essentially, at least the Supreme Court, has stayed away of issuing any directions for framing any rules and laws because the courts did not want to essentially encroach on the legislative function of the parliament. But again, recently, and especially ever since the cabinet passed the proposal for year-long celebration, this sort of has again gathered a lot of attention, and which of course is the objective of the year-long celebration as well, to get as much attention as the government can to this song. But it started with this debate in parliament also. There was a whole discussion and debate dedicated to this, in which the party in power went after the opposition for having diminished, quote unquote, diminished the stature of this song.
जिन्ना के विरोध के 5 दिन बाद ही 20 अक्टूबर को नेहरू जी ने नेताजी सुभाष बाबू को चिट्ठी लिखी। नेहरू जी कहते हैं, मैंने वंदे मातरम गीत का बैकग्राउंड पढ़ा है। नेहरू जी फिर लिखते हैं, मुझे लगता है कि ये जो बैकग्राउंड है इससे मुस्लिम भड़केंगे। साथियों,
And of course, the Congress has accused the BJP of distorting history. And the opposition feels that this whole initiative has been launched with an eye on West Bengal elections. And as we know that this song has been written by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. It's part of Anand Mat. And he's from Bengal. And maybe the opposition feels that this is being milked to benefit the party in power in the upcoming elections.
Right. And when it comes to the national anthem, there is this persistent myth that it was written by Tagore to welcome King George V in 1911, even though, this myth has been debunked over and over again. And of course, when it comes to Vande Mataram, many feel that because some of its stanzas talk about Hindu gods, including goddess Durga, it takes a very Hindu-centric view of the nation.
Of course. So for the listeners' benefit, this song has 6 stanzas, of which the first 2 are sung. The remaining were omitted because the last 4 stanzas essentially have references to Hindu goddesses. And the remaining 4 were excluded in an effort to, let's say, quote unquote, maintain the song's secular appeal and inclusivity. Because at that point, the Muslim community felt that by reciting these verses, which made references to goddesses, that they were maybe being compelled to associate their country with these goddesses. And this essentially was in conflict with their religion, which essentially forbids them, idol worship, and which forbids them from supplication of anyone to any other god. But the party in power is of the view that by doing that, you essentially a song which was a rallying cry and at one point became associated with the freedom struggle, that in order to appease a community, you essentially hurt, or rather, you diminished the stature of the song. And this is something that the BJP is now saying that it's trying to restore. Restore it back to its original glory. So even during that 150th year, the first phase last month, they sent out these emailers and notices to different education institutions. And in that, they insisted that all the 6 stanzas should be sung. So if and when the government's deliberations that fructify on how it should be sung, we do know that, even then the government would insist that all 6 and not just the first 2 stanzas of the song should be sung on prescribed occasions.
And you earlier mentioned some of the petitions that have been filed in the courts regarding Vande Mataram. But since when have we seen these attempts to prescribe these protocols to the song?
Honestly, at least not in the last decade. Like I mentioned that, while there have been demands from certain sections, again, a lot of it has been in the news cycle by way of petitions filed in court. But as far as the government is concerned, in fact, when I was doing the story, as just matter of due diligence, I was also researching if there have. So the government, at least in the last 4-5 years, in response to parliament questions, in response to stating the current position in court, has always sort of limited itself to informing the parliamentarians and the courts at large that, look, this is the current status. It has never really offered or rather signaled any intention on whether it wants to do it or not. Of course, there has been a lot of debate and speeches and everything about how, it should be restored, the stature, everything. But whether it's going to be done by way of, say, making it mandatory to sing it along with the anthem, or how it should be sung and what would happen if someone would disrespect it. All of this, frankly, I haven't seen, in at least the last 5 years. And I would even stick my neck out and say not in the last decade. So this essentially seems like the effort to kind of formalize it for at least under this government for the first time.
And just talking about this high-level government meeting, do we know what else was discussed and what the government plans to do to make this possible?
So just as how they have orders on the national anthem, the MHA could issue executive orders for the national song as well. If they want to introduce penalties, then that law has to be amended. But frankly, at least officers were expecting some kind of instructions first on how the song should be sung and on which occasions. So it could come by way of executive orders, it could come by way of amendments to the law, but I think that would be premature because they've had just one sort of formal meeting on this month. There could be more meetings, but there was a sense within the bureaucracy that there could be instructions at least issued soon on the singing of the song. Having said that, I mean, there is no way to... We reached out to MHA to kind of seek a confirmation and a comment on the instructions. We haven't heard from them. The government has been very tight-lipped about it. But if and when, like I said, if it were to happen, it would be by way of, say, a set of orders that the MHA issues and by way of amending the law to prevent any insult to National Honour Act.
And next, we turn to the question of preparedness and how seriously India is investing for the next viral outbreak. Earlier this week, the centre and the Gujarat government laid the foundation stone for a 360 crore rupees BSL-4 laboratory in Gandhinagar. This facility is basically designed to handle the world's deadliest pathogens, from Ebola to Nipah. Now, BSL-4 labs, short for Biosafety Level 4, sit at the very top of the biosecurity pyramid. They are rare, tightly regulated, and central to how countries detect, contain, and respond to global health emergencies.
Right. So the technical term Biosafety Level 4 or BSL-4 represents the highest level of biological containment.
That's the Indian Express's Brendan Dabhi.
So such laboratories are designed to safely conduct research on the world's most dangerous and life-threatening pathogens, which are highly infectious and often lack effective vaccines or treatments. For example, the BSL-4 laboratory that's coming up in Gandhinagar, along with an animal biosafety level 4 facility, their, pathogens which cause diseases like the Ebola, the Marburg virus, the Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, the Kianasur virus, the Nipah virus, all these will be researched over there. Also, the lab is capable of conducting research into the smallpox virus, which is one of the most deadliest known to mankind.
This will be only the second civilian BSL-4 lab in India, and the first to be fully funded and run by a state government. Now, what exactly will this lab do? And why does it matter beyond Gujarat? We speak to Brendan in this segment. Brendan, could you start by telling our listeners what this lab is meant to do, and also why is it considered pivotal for health security in India?
So there are basically, on a rudimentary level, two types of laboratories, diagnostic and research. So while diagnostic laboratories just conduct routine testing for diseases and outbreaks, novel research into highly infectious pathogens is conducted at BSL-4 laboratories. And there are just 2 in India and only 69 around the world. And they are highly controlled by international standards. So currently, there is only one BSL-4, civilian BSL-4 laboratory in India. It's at the National Institute of Virology in Pune, Maharashtra. It was the focal point of major COVID research during the pandemic because we didn't have much information about the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus and so believed it to be containable only at a BSL-4 facility. However, researchers later learned that it could be handled at BSL-2 plus and 3 labs. And also, a country like India had no option due to the high infection rate and the large geographical area. There is another BSL-4 lab in India, but it is restricted to military research. It is built by the DRDO in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh. Now, as to the gaps and all, one question that I don't see raised anywhere is that if one BSL-4 lab is already in Maharashtra and the second one is coming up in Gujarat, what about the rest of the country? Both of these labs now will be on the western seaboard of India. So what about the rest of the country? So more BSL-4 labs do need to come up, in other parts of the country.
Right, and we understand that the lab will include both human and animal biosafety modules. So why does that matter for real outbreaks?
So we have to understand that during coronavirus, during Chandipura virus, during the lumpy skin disease in cattle that we saw in Gujarat, all of these have taken place within the last 5 years. Okay. And what happens is that all these samples, the human samples had to be sent to NIV Pune and the animal samples had to be sent to the lab in Madhya Pradesh, which is called the National Institute of High Security Animal Diseases in Bhopal. Now, the logistical hurdles in sending samples there, several hundred kilometers away, and then you have to await these results for more than 72 hours. It can not only be crippling for clinical measures that need to be taken for the patients by the doctors, but it also can lead to increased morbidity because the results are coming so late. I can give you an example. Just recently, there was a patient who was suffering from Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, but his results came back from Maharashtra only after 4 to 5 days. So we need to avoid such delays. And the same thing happened during COVID as well. So in order to contain pandemic or even an epidemic on a regional geographical scale, you need results fast so that your local researchers understand what exactly is happening, your doctors on the ground understand what is happening, the policymakers understand what is happening, and adequate measures can be taken to control such epidemics on a regional scale.
And Brendan, you write how this is not just a testing lab, but also built for vaccine development. So could you talk a bit about that?
So BSL-2, 2+, 3 labs, there are there in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And some amount of research goes on there also. But most of this high-level research with highly infectious diseases only takes place in BSL-4 labs, such as the one in Wuhan as well, if I might mention. So although a lot of research has taken place at the GBRC, which is currently at BSL-2+ laboratory, but in order to work with even more infectious diseases, BSL-4 is required because it has a lot more features, it has a lot more technically sound measures and international standards, in order to make sure. That is why it's called a containment facility, that nothing can go out. So that's how it is used to develop vaccines and therapeutics and medicines, yes.
Right, and you highlight how this is India's first fully state-funded and state-controlled BSL-4 lab. So why is that distinction so important?
Right. So this is simply for the purposes of trying to understand how this works. Usually such assets of national strategic importance are built and controlled by the union government. For example, the lab in NIV is headed by the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR. However, in this case, the BSL-4 lab being built in Gandhinagar is being funded and built by the Gujarat government. So it is not so much as just saying state funded doesn't just mean a public sector lab here, but it means funded by the state government. And considering that GBRC was one of the first labs to decode the entire genome of the coronavirus in India and begin testing for it even before being included in INSACOG, which is the national network of COVID labs, I believe this state funding of a BSL-4 lab could help set a precedence for other states to build their own research labs and strengthen the pandemic preparedness at the regional level.
And lastly, Brendan, in a fast-moving outbreak like we're currently witnessing with Nipah virus in West Bengal, where around 100 people have been quarantined and there are several active cases, so what would change on the ground once a facility like the BSL-4 lab is operational?
So these highly infectious diseases need to be studied in detail right now. Although this is happening in different parts of the world, we need to be self-reliant in being able to conduct our own research into these diseases and the pathogens that cause them. Now, when local epidemics are coming up in newer places, this is even more threatening. Seen only in southern India, now it's being seen in eastern India. So a set of such BSL-4 labs spread out across at least the 4 corners of the country could help do research into these regional geographies of these diseases and their cycles and how they are spread and what can be done to develop vaccines and medicines for them. However, we lack any such major facility in the eastern part of India. So this is a problem which needs to be addressed. It is the need of the hour, especially for a large country like India.
And in the end, we turn our attention to an incident of caste-based violence. In Jharkhand's Dhanbad, a 46-year-old Dalit sanitation worker was allegedly assaulted with a broom and abused using caste slurs after she refused to clean the front of a shop without being paid. As reported by the Indian Express's Shubham Tiga, the incident took place on Monday in the Jaria area. According to the complaint filed by the woman, Manju Devi Valmiki, she was engaged in private sanitation work in the market area when the owner of the shop, identified as Sunil Kesari, asked her to clean garbage outside his cloth shop without offering payment. When she refused, he allegedly used caste-based slurs, snatched her broom, and assaulted her. A video of the incident circulated on social media, showing the man striking the woman with a broom and abusing her. Police say the video has been examined as part of the investigation. Manju Devi Valmiki is a sanitation worker from Valmiki Colony in Jharkhand. Her son, Raja Kumar Valmiki, told the Indian Express that his mother often cleans shops and roads in the market area and is frequently not paid for her work. He said she had cleaned the same shop on several occasions earlier without receiving payment, but refused this time, which led to the confrontation. According to her son, the accused allegedly grabbed her hand and hit her on the head with the handle of the broom while using casteist remarks. He also said that although people were present at the market, no one intervened immediately to stop the assault. The situation de-escalated only after a bystander recorded the incident, following which community members intervened. Tika highlights that in her complaint, Manju Devi also alleged that the shopkeeper had displayed inappropriate behavior toward her on previous occasions and had ill intentions. These allegations are part of the FIR. Jharkhand Police Inspector Bhimlal Paswan said the police registered the case under sections of the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act, along with relevant provisions of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Police said they are in the process of arresting the accused. The police added that statements are being recorded and that further action will be taken based on the investigation and examination of evidence, including the video footage. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.